Alright, well the sun came out today, so all our snow is melting, which is a good thing because it's April 2nd, so anyway, welcome back to the shop. I need to finish working on our Damascus billet here. It's 21 layers right now. It needs to be more. I'm not going to go super high on this because, like I said earlier, I'm planning to use it for like the outer layer on some Sanmai blades. I'm going to make just a great blade by itself, but I like to use 1095 or something like that for the edge on the knife. And this is 1075, so a little bit lower carbon content. Perfectly good steel still, but anyway, that's what we're gonna do with that. And then I'll keep forging on these other two knives. And yeah, it's been one of those weeks, I guess. Kind of out in the shop a little later today. I was working on cleaning the kitchen up, getting the dishes all done, and clearing out the disaster. I was kind of falling behind on that, so that's kind of life, you know. You gotta do that. So anyway, we'll fire up the forge and start prepping this for another forge weld. So I'm going to cut this up into 4 pieces, 3-inch pieces, and that'll give us like an 80 or 90 layer count, which I think will be sufficient for what I'm doing, what I want to do. We'll just have to do the one forge weld, and we won't have to restack it. So it seems like when you get up to a really high layer count, you don't necessarily see all the layers anyway most of the time. Depending on how you forge it and what kind of pattern you're doing. And so since I'm going to be welding these onto the sides of blades, you know, for the Sanmai, grinding it at an angle is going to reveal all these layers, and so I should be able to get to sort of make use of 80 or 90 layers and actually see most of those layers. So as you can see here, no distinction on this cut end of the layers at all. The only place you can kind of see it is where it gets a little hotter. You can distinguish the layers a little bit. I believe that's because the nickel content in the steel, I believe it's because nickel absorbs or reacts to heat at a different rate or a little differently than iron and steel does. So I think that's why that kind of makes it show up, but otherwise you can't see it at all. Now on your end pieces, as is common, you know, this is right here at the end. I've got a little bit of, you know, I could go ahead and cut that off. I'm not gonna, because it's gonna be on the outside where I put this billet or this piece, and you can see right here, that's just because it's on the end. You come back into right here and it's nice and solid, but this is gonna be waste on the end anyway, so I'm really not too worried about it. So anyway, now we got to clean up the surfaces really clean and flat, and we'll put these together and run a bead down each seam, and it'll be ready to put back in the forge. Alright, so we have our pieces stacked and welded together all the way around, so it's completely sealed. No fuss, no muss. It's awesome. And the reason I use the angle grinder first before taking it to the belt grinder is because the scale on the outside of this just eats your belts up, and those are not cheap, so it just saves a lot to knock that scale off first and then make it nice and flat with the belt grinder before you stack them up. Got the weld set nicely. I'm going to squish it one more time, and then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take it and grind off the surface of the welding beads on the sides before I start forging it on all four sides. The reason for this is if I don't do that, it's going to push those beads into the billet, which is going to make more waste that's going to have to be cut off, because obviously that's mild steel. So if I grind it off now, it's going to cut like in half the amount of bead that's going to be in the billet that's going to have to be discarded. So just a little extra step that'll help save as much of our good steel of the billet as possible. So when you're working with Damascus, it's important to remember that every action you do to it is going to affect, and often dramatically affect, the finished pattern. So we have a raindrop pattern here, and I'm forging this on these two blades here. I'm forging this out some more, so that's going to distort the raindrop pattern a little bit into more of an oval shape, which is intentional. And then on this big billet that we're forge welding right now, it looks something like this, with about 80 or 90 layers in here, like so. So they're a lot closer together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to forge it down to about 3/8 of an inch thick, and about 1.5 inches wide. So it's going to have all those layers in here like so. Obviously I can't draw all the layers, but what is going to happen then is when I use it for a San Mai blade, so you're going to have your piece of high carbon steel, mono steel in the center, and then another piece, whoops, of the Damascus steel with the layers. And I'm not doing any pattern manipulation to this steel, because what my goal is once I forge this blade out, obviously all those layers are going to be really close together because of the dimensions of the steel. To affect the pattern, what I'm trying to say is when I grind that blade, this is a lot thicker than it's going to be in real life, but it's going to have these pieces of steel, and then I'm going to grind that flat grind onto it. So I'm going to be cutting across the layers of this steel. And so when you look at it from this side, what you're going to see is whoops, that's a horrible blade. What you're going to see is all those layers. You're going to see the sides are, you know, at an angle, all those layers running up the blade as far down as the Damascus San Mai comes. And so that's what the goal is with the big billet that we're forge welding. So you can see I've got the two Santoku style blades drawn out a little closer to the thickness I want at the spine. So now I just have to run this through the press again, flatten those out and bring it down a little bit thinner. It's still a touch thick. Getting pretty close to finishing up the two Santoku blades. I decided to go ahead and forge a little bit of the bevel in back towards the handle just so that I have enough depth. I want to get it right about 2 inches. I don't want to have those blades to be too narrow. They're right at the heel, so I'm going to forge that a little bit. And then I've got the San Mai stock billet about forged out to what I want it. So just to show you guys a little more specifically what I did on these blades is I did forge the tangs down for a tapered tang design, and then the spine thickness is pretty much the same. I'll grind in a bit of a distal taper, and then I did end up beveling just a little bit just to get some more width to right at 2 inches, so my finished dimension can be a little bit narrower, but I didn't want to end up too narrow on these. And then of course our billet here is still hot, but it's 2 feet, about 3/8 inch thick, about 1.5 inches wide, and that'll be some good San Mai stock for a bunch of future projects. So that's good, and it's well, it would have been 84 layers, I guess, but you know, it's probably closer to 75 or whatever. Unless you want to count the ones that are grinding dust on the floor. Anyway, thanks for watching, and see you on the next video.